Hello and welcome to BSME Talks episode 2. I'm Debra Forsyth, CEO of BSME, British Schools in the Middle East, and we're delighted to have with us today Emily Konstantas, founder and CEO of the Safeguarding Alliance, who's going to be joining today's podcast to talk about the work of BISSC, the British International Schools Safeguarding Coalition. For BSME, safeguarding is at the core of everything that we do as an organisation. So being founder members of BISSC and working with the coalition to improve global safeguarding in schools across the world is incredibly close to our hearts. Emily, welcome to BSME Talks. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Debra. And I'm very impressed that you got my name right. I just remember it's Can't Stand Us. So you got that perfect. So thank you so much for having me.
I'm really looking forward to getting some input from you today and having you update us on what's going on with BISSC and the exciting work that you do for safeguarding. Emily, can I kick off by asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself and your company's pioneering work in the safeguarding arena?
I shall indeed, Debra. I'm going to talk about myself. I'm not sure there's much to say, other than I am really quite obsessed with safeguarding, as many of you who'll be listening to this podcast will be aware. Safeguarding for me is this is not just a company. This is actually a way of life in terms of what we're doing. We are absolutely passionate about championing legislative reform, safeguarding best practice around the globe. Some of the work that we've done recently, and I'm sure many of you will be so fed up of hearing me talk about it, but I'm going to get it into every single podcast, every single anywhere I speak, actually. Some things we've been up to is obviously, of course, Della's law, and I wanted to just start by saying that the Safeguarding Alliance, some of the work we've previously done, we've lobbied the UK government after identifying quite a serious safeguarding loophole, whereby registered sex offenders who may have been in prison are actually able to change their name by deed poll. And in the UK, if you change your name by deed poll, you get a new passport and a new driving license. And in doing so, you can present 2 forms of identification to get a absolutely clear police certificate, even though you may have been in prison. So that's some of the work that the Safeguarding Alliance have been doing in terms of trying to lobby legislative reform. And Della's law is very, very close to our hearts. I'm not going to talk for hours on it. I promise, Debra, don't worry. You can go and just Google Della's law and a lot will come up. I'm super excited with the work that's taking place at BISSC and actually a new piece of legislative reform that we're hoping to lobby, which I'm not going to touch upon just as we started this podcast. I'm going to give a little teaser to make sure that you stay towards the end of this podcast. But this is another piece of safeguarding reform that we're looking into. So what we're really about is actually identifying where are there safeguarding loopholes and how can we work together to close them, because actually safeguarding is every single person's responsibility. And if you are a school listening to this today, yes, you may be schools down the road from each other and you may be competing for pupils in terms of coming into the school, but the one thing you can never compete on, the one thing you must always collaborate on is safeguarding. So really what we're about is that wider collaboration piece. So to be here with yourself, Debra, is absolutely fantastic, and to talk about the work of BISSC, which is really groundbreaking, and the ripple effect that it's having actually within the international community is huge.
Yeah, and it is phenomenally important work. And I'm really glad that you brought up Della's law, because I think sometimes there can be a bit of a thought of that this is the work that we're looking at is so big, and sometimes it's a little overawing and you think, what can we as individuals do? But I think Della's law is a real perfect example of what individuals can do when there's a real concerted effort and a determination to make change. So I'm really glad that you spoke about that, because obviously the work that Della herself and that you have done on bringing about that change in legislation is phenomenally important. And the finding of loopholes and trying to close them, I know, is very much part of what you and the Safeguarding Alliance are all about. Now, let's take us then back to BISSC. So can you talk us through what sparked the formation of BISSC, explain why it was important to have a cross-association approach rather than just one association having its own individual standards?
Of course. Well, a lot of it sparked of a conversation with John Gwyn Jones. A conversation really actually sparked. We're all doing Safeguarding Alliance, BSME, COBIS, AOBSO, LAHC, NABS, for BISSC, and I've mentioned for BISSC. I hope I've not forgotten any of the associations, because there's so many of them to talk about. We're all working together in terms of safeguarding. We're all identifying loopholes. We're all seeing risk. But actually, if we only see them in isolation to the individual association, how can we pick up wider global trends? How can we actually identify no, this isn't an issue just over in Asia. This is actually an issue over in the MENA region. And actually we might see this somewhere else in the world. So bringing BISSC together and bringing the associations to come together with a singular focus on safeguarding is absolutely important. We see organizations where they will have people pop in and out of schools, and obviously the Safeguarding Alliance, we're not just working with schools, charities and other organizations. And our concern is we will sometimes often see somebody being removed from one organization, and then lo and behold, we'll pop over to another part of the world, and there they are in an organization. So actually, the purpose of BISSC is really just to tighten up on safeguarding. And so often when we think about safeguarding, it's often seen as a tick box. Yes, we've got a policy. Yes, we have some training. How do we ensure there's a culture? So if at the heart of all of the associations is safeguarding, that effect going into any school that joins the association is placing safeguarding at the core responsibility and the core foundation. And I know we talk about safeguarding and we're always referring it to a UK model. Why BISSC for me is so important in relation to creating that cross association is because it's not just taking a UK model of safeguarding and planting. Debra, we're both sitting here in our Dubai offices, not together, but different parts of Dubai. And we've got people sitting in other offices around the world. And actually, if you think about it, you can't take a UK model of safeguarding and plant it in Dubai and think it's going to grow just because it's worked over in the UK. It has to be contextual. So for me, what's really interesting about BISSC, representing so many schools from around the world, we can look at actually what's working, what's not working, the barriers that some schools are facing when they're looking at reporting, and actually how we can support from an association level in lobbying government. And I'm not going to go on about the lobbying government, so I know we're going to talk about that later on within this podcast. So that really is what sparked BISSC. It's a joint passion and commitment in keeping children safe within international education. And we know that actually, yes, in the UK, we've got keeping children safe in education, but is it fit for purpose internationally? And do we need to make sure that we've got something there in place for our schools? Sorry, Debra, stop me because you know I could talk for England on this matter. So just make sure you bring me back to the room.
No, I think you've made some really interesting points there, Emily. And particularly, I think teaching is becoming very much an international career, and teachers are moving around the world as part of their career. And that ability of teachers to move from one region to another, from one country to another, and not necessarily have joined up safeguarding around that is a really important point that you've raised. I'm going to run through those organisations that you mentioned one more time, just so we've got so our listeners have got an idea of the geographical reach and the scope of BISSC. So you mentioned obviously BSME. We are representing the Middle East and North Africa here. We've got FOBASIA in the Co-Alliance. They're from Asia. They're representing their schools in Asia. Latin American Heads Conference for schools in Latin America. NABS for schools in Spain, and then AOBSO and COBIS, who work with schools across the world, as of course do yourself and the Safeguarding Alliance. And we did do just a little bit of maths on this, and together the coalition membership represents almost 1,000 schools worldwide, who are responsible for the safeguarding of 500,000 students and young people. So I think that's just a real measure of how important this organisation is when you look at how many students safeguarding we're responsible for collectively between us. Now, let's actually look at what BISSC have achieved. So BISSC has been going for just over 2 years, 2 and a bit years now. And one of the first jobs that the coalition as an organisation, when we were chatting, set themselves was the development of a common BISSC safer recruitment code of conduct. And I know that as organisations, we were sort of saying, okay, let's start with our organisation first. Let's try to make sure that everything is as tight as possible within each of our own individual organisations. So that's where the code of conduct came from. Could you give us an overview of what the code of conduct is, what it's about, what it requires from schools?
Absolutely. So the code of conduct is more than just a piece of paper. And I know some schools listening to this with, well, we've already got policies in place for safer recruitment, or we've already got various things. But actually, what the code of conduct is doing, and we are seeing this firsthand at BISSC, and I think this is super, super exciting. It's creating consistency and standards within safer recruitment. It's creating that applied consistent practice that actually, what do references look like? What questions should be asked? How do we look at the application form? What are we cross-referencing again? What is actually the absolute requirements in ensuring that those who we are recruiting within education are safe to be there in the first place? And what for me is really important about this is when we think about safe recruitment, and I often go into schools and I'll see this, the safe recruitment policy is wonderful, but it talks about very much the person coming into the school. And I think of this as a gatekeeping function. If you think about a gate, when the gate is open, there's all, who's going to come in the gate, and we're going to make sure, are they safe for the security gate? We give them their lanyards and, are they coming in? But when the gate closes, how do we ensure that they're safe? Safe recruitment doesn't stop at that gate. It needs to be an ongoing, continued safe recruitment. And there needs to be a continued understanding. How do we deal with an allegation or a concern? What about when somebody exits the organisation, when that gate opens up again and people, we know international education is very transient. What happens when people are moving around? So if we think about safer de-recruitment as well as part of this. So for me, what the code of conduct is doing is it's really looking at international best practice and standards, aligning it with legislation, internationally, actually what works on the ground, and actually saying to schools, this is what you need to do to keep children safe. And Deborah, just going back to what you said, over 500,000 children, that is a huge number of children that our association schools have responsibility for. And how many policies we've got there, unless people are safe to be in these schools in the first place, some of those policies will become null and void. So the safe recruitment code of conduct is really starting from the beginning and actually saying, this is what it means to actually recruit safely. And it's so very, very much needed to ensure that ongoing piece of work stays in place.
There, thanks, Emily. And as you say, that we have that ability to share between organisations, so that if there are problems, we have concerns, that they don't stay isolated within one school or one organisation or one region, but that there's a capacity for sharing concerns more widely. And I know that's something that we're working on. We're working on more globally too. You've spent lots of your life, Emily, going into schools and doing safeguarding audits and help supporting schools with their safeguarding processes. What have you found as the most common gap in a school's recruitment practices when you're looking at what schools are doing?
I think there are a number of gaps, but I think the biggest one for me is in relation to references. We often see that schools haven't taken appropriate references. So we will go into an organisation or a school, and we'll audit the safe recruitment, and actually references will be in place, but they haven't checked who the referees are. So they may just follow up with a phone call, but actually the email doesn't even relate to where the individual's working. Some of the referees are giving references for people that are not even in the correct position. Mm-hmm. For example, Deborah, we know that for a head teacher, the only person who can really give a reference for a head teacher is their line manager, and that would be somebody on the board or a proprietor. But so often we see that that's not actually the case. We often see things like double checking, cross-referencing, that's not taking place. So for me, this is really important. To give you an example, we've gone into schools and we've seen number of police certificates there, but actually the passport number on the police certificate may have 5-6 separate passport numbers on police certificates from all around the world in a very short period of time. Now I know with a UK passport, and Debra, I don't know what passport you've got, but you know if you've got an adult UK passport, you don't change it every couple of years. So little things that actually for me would raise a red flag, people aren't picking up on. The other thing that I would say internationally is we see within the HR team, sometimes language can be a huge barrier. If English isn't your first language, you may not pick up things in a reference that actually you would pick up if English or that language would be your first language. So for me, it's really ensuring that some of the gaps that we're seeing, I think the code of conduct can really support this, because actually it's providing that framework of not just this is what you've got to do, this is actually really how you do it. So in terms of the gaps, the biggest gaps that I would see, it would really be around references, not following up, not having an eye for detail. And I know that sounds very, is that really a gap? But it is, because so often we will go in and there's so many holes in staff files, but actually this hasn't been picked up on. And what I would really say for me, if you are a school listening to this today, there's one of my biggest gaps, actually, I've got thousands of gaps here. You asked me for one, Deborah, and I've probably given you 20. One of the biggest issues that I would say that we see, there's often a huge focus on those who are being recruited today. But if you're a head teacher and you're listening to this podcast, or you're in HR and you're listening to this podcast, ask yourself a question: how long have you been in the school? Because I am sure that there are people in that school that predate your employment. We know with safeguarding practice, it changes all the time. What we're doing today, we're probably going to be frowned upon in 5 years and think, oh, look at that safe guidelines. They thought that was good practice. They want to see what we're doing now. But if you think about that in safe recruitment, we know that staff files, safe recruitment 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 15 years ago was very, very different. So for me, one of the biggest risks I see within schools and organizations, and I do think it's a huge gaping gap, is actually that we're not going back and checking historical staff files. There's a huge focus on current staff files. So for me, if we're talking about the code of conduct, it's not just the application of who's coming through the doors today, who's already in our gates, who's already within our school, that we need to ensure that they're actually safe to be there. So many times we'll go into an organisation and a staff file from 15 years ago, it might not have a police certificate. They're not doing annual self-declarations, which some of the things obviously we talk about within the code of conduct. They're not doing safeguarding assurance agreements in place with third-party contractors where they're coming in and working with pupils. So for me, it's really about ensuring that we're not just looking at the now, we're also considering the past as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting, particularly talking there about files and the importance of schools documenting and evidencing their compliance with the code of conduct, with their own policies as well, of course. You've mentioned their staff files, so single central records are incredibly important. What documentation should schools be presenting and filing and keeping a very careful check of? You've mentioned references there, Emily. What else should schools be really making sure that they have got documented in their files?
Qualifications, right to work, medical fitness, proof of residency, for example. Evidence, I know we can't keep physical police certificates on file, but evidence you've actually seen the police certificate. Because actually, if you see a police certificate and it has a concern or a remark on it, if it's not being kept on the file, are we then going to know that there's any concern? Risk assessments in place, application forms. The other thing that we hardly ever see where we go and historically look at staff files are interview notes. And actually, what's your rationale as to why you've recruited this person? We were called into a school, and actually the school called us in because we were conducting a practice review where somebody had actually just been dismissed because of safeguarding reasons. The first thing that we did was actually, can we see what was the rationale of recruiting this person? When we looked at the interview records, somebody had put a big X, do not recruit, this person doesn't know anything about safeguarding, on the safeguarding questions. And the other person just put a smiley face and a little star and a few little squiggles. And that was just filed. There was no scrutiny involved in this. So for me, it's about having evidence why you're making these decisions. We see so many schools historically that have just accepted CVs in replacement of an application form. You need to have this information on an application form, cross-referencing the reference forms, standardizing the reference forms. I know that's something we're going to be working on at BISSC, is creating a BISSC best practice reference form, yes. But ensuring that that's a social media check. It's not just about, I don't mean, employ a private detective to go inside somebody's private social media, but just a simple Google search can bring up so much about a person, or in some cases will bring nothing. And that's a question, why is there absolutely nothing, not even a name mentioned, where they've been ahead for all of these years? But again, for me, in terms of those staff files, it's that evidence. It's your protection for you as a head and for you as an HR lead. It's really important that you're evidencing why you've made that decision, that rationale. If we think about concerns that are then put on staff files, where we've got to consider actually, you may be sitting here in your job today, and you may be already Googling looking for a new job. How would you protect your reputation when you're not even within the organization? And having clear evidence trails really does do that. And for me, there are huge important areas within a school, but one of the biggest areas of importance actually really is within the safe recruitment and the HR team themselves.
Thank you very much, Emily. And I will say that with regard to HR practices, we're delighted to be having the Safeguarding Alliance working alongside BSME. BSME are funding safer recruitment training for all of our schools. So we have lots of HR leads who will be attending training with Emily's organisation and actually going in detail through this HR process from beginning to end, so that they can go back and scrutinise their own policies and systems in their schools and see where improvement can be made. Within the code of conduct, we are encouraging schools to help hold each other accountable. So we have asked that if schools believe that another school has breached the code of conduct, is not actually fulfilling their requirements as part of that they actually report that to one of the member organisations. There's a code of conduct reporting form. And this is really not about dobbing someone in. It's not about trying to get another school into trouble. It really is just about trying to help our schools help each other to be accountable and to be doing the right thing. The aim there will be that once that issue has been reported, we'll have a look at that, we'll talk to the school, and we'll see how we can support them to improve the standards in whatever area it is where they perhaps are not meeting them at the moment. So lots of work ongoing there, Emily. But I now want to move you on a little bit. So apart from launching the code of conduct, the BISSC membership team have been working very busily on other aspects of safeguarding too. So can I ask you to give us an update on the other work that is ongoing with BISSC, what progress we've got, and what outcomes you're hoping to see, perhaps in the next year?
Absolutely. Well, Debra, how long have I got? I know I've got to get off this podcast soon. I know people are going to be, oh, somebody stop her talking. It's really exciting what's coming up next actually with BISSC. So for those association schools that are listening to this, you will know that we sent out a consultation just before the winter break, really to ask schools in relation to international reporting back to regulators. So we know for international teachers that teachers who are qualified, they will be regulated by the TRA. I'm talking for the UK stance now. The TRA, Teachers Regulations Agency, they will be regulated by the EWC for Wales, the General Teachers Council for Northern Ireland, and also Scotland. But actually, what we're looking at within BISSC is the mechanisms of reporting back and actually really ensuring that there is a robust system in place, that schools, if they do have a concern for a teacher, they are able to report back to the regulator, and ensuring that it doesn't just sit outside of jurisdiction. Because actually, if we think about safeguarding only works when we work together. So really, it's about ensuring that the regulators are part of this as well. I had an extremely high level and important meeting that took place in the House of Lords just before the winter break, where we had really high profile stakeholders there, including, just to name a few, and I apologize for those that are listening and I haven't named them all. You know what I'm like about forgetting names. John for BISSC, if you're listening to this, I'm repeating for BISSC because I forgot him on the BSME stage at the BSME Wonderful Conference. But actually we had Interpol, we had Europol, National Crime Agency, we had the DFE, FCDO, the DBS, the TRA, lots of regulators around the table. And actually we were looking at the importance of creating additional checks, because yes, individuals may sit outside of jurisdiction, but unless we can report back and there's a mechanism to deal with that, actually it kind of holds that check, the prohibition of teachers check, redundant, unless we're ensuring that there's an up-to-date database. So some of the work that we're currently looking at, we've got a number of meetings, very high profile meetings lined up. I really want to discuss them, Debra, but you know I'm not allowed to discuss everything. But we've got a number of high profile meetings lined up, and one of the things that we're looking at launching is an international teachers check that would actually allow cross jurisdiction, because I know we often come up around data protection. There's nothing more important than keeping a child safe. It overrides absolutely everything. But I know actually schools listening to this will be saying, well, we can't share because we've got data protection laws and GDPR. So one of the things that we're looking at with the relevant regulators, government entities, is actually how we can overcome that moving forward. And I think that's actually quite groundbreaking. We had an amendment read out in the Schools and Wellbeing Bill. I know it's probably got a longer name than that. I've done so many pieces of legislation, Debra, I keep forgetting the names. But we had Lord Jim Knight obviously championed that for us in the House of Lords in terms of getting an amendment through. But outside of the bill reading, BISSC have been doing a huge amount of work behind the scenes in terms of bringing organisations together. And I think what's so groundbreaking about this, Debra, and I think actually it's important for us at BISSC to take a moment just to reflect on how far we have actually come. We've managed in a very short period of time to get Interpol, Europol, National Crime Agency, the Department for Education, every single association in a room, round a table, albeit I couldn't manage to work the clicker and the PowerPoint wouldn't move on. But we got them all around a table and really got them to discuss where there are loopholes in safeguarding. And unless we've got people having those conversations, exactly as I've just said, it only works if we work together. If we're all talking about an issue in silo, and we think about why BISSC was formed, it was formed so we can unite safeguarding across associations. So BISSC are not just now uniting safeguarding across associations, BISSC are bridging that gap and bridging that bridge actually between associations to absolute decision makers within policy and regulation. And for me, that's absolutely key. Safeguarding should be on the top of every single person's agenda, from accrediting bodies, examination bodies, to government entities and police. And actually, the more that we champion this and the more we shout about this together as a voice, we are stronger. So one of the things that we're looking in is obviously access for prohibition information for overseas schools. What we identified at BISSC is, thankfully we've got AOBSO, we've got COBISS within the association where you can have prohibition checks. But actually at BISSC, we want any school that is employing somebody who is registered as a UK registered teacher through a regulator to have access to the online portals. We want our association schools to be able to, as they would if they were sitting within England or the UK, to log on and actually check within real time, is that person prohibited, without having to wait for an association to come back. So that's something else that we're calling on at BISSC, is access to all schools to the prohibition register. In the interim, we are calling for all associations, BSME, I'm going to have to go through the associations now, Deborah, now you're going to have to make sure I don't forget one, BSME, AOBSO, LAHC, NABS, COBISS, FOBASIA, the Safeguarding Alliance. Have I forgotten anybody? I think I have.
That's the lot.
We're calling for all associations to have access to the portal, so it's not limited to just 2 associations. But again, that would be a huge benefit for schools moving
Big
forward.
step forward, yeah.
And then, not forgetting all of the templates that we've got coming up. So we've got reference templates coming up, and a huge thank you to BSME actually, specifically Debra, who's put together a really good reporting form for schools to be able to make reports into BISSC too. And that brings us another step closer in working with the regulators and the organisations. We're not very good at communicating how much work is going on behind the scenes, and actually that's something that I don't do very well at in the safeguarding lines anyway, because it's not about safeguarding should not be about just getting a badge and so I've done this training, I've done that. It's actually about making that change. But there's huge amount of work that's going on behind the scenes at BISSC that we are all immensely proud of to have even got this far. So I thank you everybody for kind of holding with us at BISSC, and it really is very important.
And it's really nice, Emily, to have had this opportunity to talk about that work that's ongoing and share that wider across the BSME audience, but hopefully across the audience in the UK too. I think the meeting that you mentioned at the House of Lords, I think, was really great in terms of putting international British education on people's agendas. We have so many British overseas schools, and they are now firmly on the agenda of anybody involved in safeguarding within the UK. And I think that's just a really big step forward. So we are now coming to the end of our podcast, Emily, and I'd like to wrap up the podcast by asking you our closing question. We know that teachers can have a huge influence, far-reaching ripple effects that we possibly can't often imagine. Emily, which of your own teachers that you have known, worked with, met, had the most influence on you, and why?
Okay, Debra, this is a very difficult question, having had so many teachers. What I would say, I think there's both a positive and a negative to this. I think one of the most significant things I remember probably at secondary school is I used to struggle a lot when I was younger with making eye contact, with something I've really worked on a lot over the years. And I remember being in a room with a teacher who was quite literally shouting in my face, saying, "You must make eye contact when I'm talking to you." And I remember thinking, if this is ever a way to make a child turn off to learning, this is definitely how you would do it. And I would say I probably should be coming on here giving all the positives around teachers. Now, I'm sure there's some wonderful teachers. I can't say I've had in my secondary school experience the best experience with teachers, but I think in a way that kind of drove me more, the more that I was told that you're not going to be able to do anything, and you probably, well, actually I was told you'll be lucky if you amount to being a cleaner, because cleaners require GCSEs. So I think possibly from a negative became a positive. But I would say the most influential teacher for me was probably my violin teacher, not an all subject. And those of you probably don't even know I play the violin.
No.
But he very much allowed me to rewrite Mozart if I wanted to, or play the violin upside down whilst eating a sandwich, because he didn't believe that actually we all learn in the same way, and actually was very much able to adapt his teaching to allow me to learn in probably in a very unusual way, playing upside down or whatever it was, but he allowed me to express myself and be me. So I think I've seen both negatives and positive teaching, and I think that for me the biggest influence is teachers that have allowed me to just be who I am, which is quite quirky, as you definitely know, Debra, being part of BISSC with me. but I would say, yeah, that they are probably some of the most influential moments in teaching that I've had.
No, I would agree with you there, Emily. I think that valuing of our students for who and what they are is a phenomenally important part of allowing them to flourish. So I'm glad to hear that your violin teacher allowed that. And no, I didn't know you played the violin. I must get you to play at one of our conferences, Emily.
Oh no, I'm not that good anymore, Deborah.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Well, thanks, Emily. And that does bring us to the end of our podcast. Now, if you would like to keep up to date with what's going on with BISSC, there are a number of ways in which you can do this. Certainly via the BSME website, we have a BISSC section. Also through the Safeguarding Alliance website or the websites of any of the other founding members that we've mentioned during the podcast. They will all have BISSC sections on their website. And of course, any significant updates, we'll make sure that we keep you posted on that here on BSME Talks. Emily, thank you once again for joining us today and for all the fantastic work that you do campaigning for safeguarding in our schools and in the wider global context. You do a fantastically important job. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Lovely to speak to everybody today. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for listening and happy teaching.